Hello, I'm Dave Prine, and
I'm Rick Derman.
we are lollygagging with languages. So, Rick, how are your languages going this week?
Well, at the moment, it's the language. It's only French because I'm just concentrating on it at the moment. Not too bad. I've got a lesson tomorrow on iTalki, which I'll talk about in a minute. But uh, I don't know if people are familiar with iTalki. It's basically where you can sign up to get lessons from professional teachers, or you can do language exchanges, or various other things through either Google Hangouts or Skype or some sort of internet IP phone type thing. But yeah, I'll talk about that in a minute. But I've got a lesson tomorrow. I schedule one generally every week. And that's it, really. I've been doing a lot of cards, Anki flashcard type things, and reading, lots and lots of reading. Stephen King at the moment in French. So, there you go.
Nice, nice.
And you?
I'm mainly learning or working on Maya Quiche, so language spoken in Guatemala, and I'm learning it. I'm taking a class in grad school, and so that's kind of my main focus. But also, I'm working on German. That was my undergraduate degree way back when, and I'm trying to get it up and running, especially for grad school. Everything right now, language-wise, is sort of grad school-centric. But I do want to get some Spanish back, and I've been kind of just cherry picking from Manx and Navajo, and now there's a language called Tunica that I worked on a project with some people at Tulane University, and I've just gotten back in touch with them, and I may be attending an intensive workshop program. So that is a new language as of last week. So it's endangered. It's being revitalized, and if you know anything about me, you know that I love that sort of thing. So it's sort of like every week it's going to rotate, but mainly Quiche and German. Those are the ones I'm focusing on right now, and just kind of studying German on my own. I have a number of books. I'm working on this. I don't know if you know the Language Learners Forum, but they host a challenge every now and then, and where you read so many books and watch so many videos and try and get your language up and running through that. So do you know anything about that, Rick? Could you speak about that if you do?
Yeah, well, given that I'm the administrator of that forum, I have a good idea or a fair idea about it. Yeah, there's a super challenge bot that we run the challenge well, I say every year, but it runs more than a year. It runs from May until December of the next year, the following year. And in that time, you have to read 100 books and watch 100 movies in your target language to complete the challenge. And some mad people do double challenge of 200 films and 200 books. I signed up for that one, but I've done the films, but I haven't managed the books yet. So yeah, that actually ends this December, but the next one will start in May 2018. So if anybody wants to sign up for it, it's really, really, really helpful for your language learning. It's really good. Now, Dave, sometimes I think you make these languages up. Keychain and tunic. Really? Nobody. And German? Who's going to believe that? That's not real.
And I'm studying Schlanderbunk and Kugelschmecken knees. So those are really hard, and only 0 people speak any of those.
Well, you do.
No, apparently.
No, but yeah. Seriously, this the grad school thing with the endangered languages. Can you just tell us a bit more about that? I'm quite interested in really how did they plan to revitalize this language? Because we recently had an argument about this sort of thing in on one of the forums threads about no, we haven't yet successfully revitalized the language. Now, my argument was that Manx was revitalized, but then other people begged to differ strongly. So can you sort of give us a bit more information on that? Or
it's hard to say. I don't know what the official definitions are. I think that Manx has made a wonderful comeback. But it's not safe. I mean, no language is safe. People think, oh, English, will take over and dominate. But when the fleet from Zornak 7 come and they overtake our planet and make us speak their language, then of course English is at risk. But right now, what we're working on is or what I'm working on is trying to get involved with groups who are trying to document their languages or use resources like written records or elder speakers to document the language, to try and write it down, create some kind of orthography, determine some grammar. And with Tunica, this is sort of it's a bit of a surprise. There were old documents, and there was a semi-fluent speaker who we got some information from, and Mary Haas had these transcriptions from long ago, and I helped to revise them and transliterate that, or I guess I basically rewrote them in the new orthography, and then I kind of left it at that. And the people at Tulane University ended up doing something with it, and I ran into Judith Maxwell from Tulane, and she said, "Oh yeah, we've got people speaking. We're working on neologisms and using the words that we have to create new ones." And they do this intensive summer camp, and they do something in January. And so they've got a language going. I don't know how complete it is, but they're bringing it back as best they can. And the truth is, even if you keep a language from dying, you can't keep it the way it is. It's always going to change. There's always risk of a language becoming simplified, or just changing or borrowing words from other sources. So really, there's no such thing as a safe language. I think the main thing that people try and do is just take a picture of it and try and keep it going, keep it alive so it can change down the line. But in the meantime, take a picture of it in the form of a dictionary, a grammar, and some languages just end up being, volumes in a library because their speakers die or they choose not to continue using the language. But other organizations and groups try to create resources for teaching the language or for promoting it. And it's really fascinating. This is the stuff that I want to do, but I also realize that really it's a very difficult process with very little guarantee of successful results.
So, I mean, I had a couple of questions there. So one was, what geographical region is that particular language? Where did it originate? Is it sort of North American, South American?
North American, it's Louisiana. So it's the Tunica Biloxi tribe. And I believe there are two other tribes that are related in some way with a different language, but fewer speakers and fewer resources and evidence of language. So Tunica is mainly the language, the tribe, and they're mostly located in Louisiana. But there is, I think, a branch in the Chicago area of all places. Go figure.
Yeah. So what's your feeling on, I mean, you obviously are keen for revitalization of languages and things, but I mean, I don't, to sort of play the devil's advocate here, I don't want to go back to speaking Shakespearean English or Old English of Beowulf or whatever. I'm not really, thee and thou and all that sort of crap. I don't want to do that. So why would the sort of indigenous people who more or less have sort of given up the ghost on this language, or not, they're not really interested. I mean, some people might be, but I'm assuming that this is because the vast majority of them have adopted another language, in that case probably English or possibly French. Why, other than just for a documentary, why revitalize, I suppose, is the question I'm asking. Why bother?
It's a valid question. I mean, most people, I like it just because I hate the idea of a language dying before I get to study 100 words of it. But there are a number of reasons that don't affect the world at large, but mainly the groups themselves. It represents their culture, it represents their heritage, and it's a part of their identity. And knowing that this is where they come from and this is what they spoke is vastly important for just for their well-being. I mean, there are a lot of cases of Native Americans who drink themselves to death or kill themselves because they don't feel that connection with their heritage. They feel like their identity has been overridden by this English/American identity, and that happens worldwide. There's also a sense of just having this knowledge be lost. I mean, these are different ways of communicating. This is these are different ways of showing how the brain works, how humans take on language and view language, and it's especially interesting for linguists, of course. And just it's David Harrison, who's a linguist and really big on revitalization. He says that every language that is spoken in the world is a complete sum of the knowledge of this world, and every time we lose language, we lose that chunk of knowledge. So there's sort of a general linguistic fascination with it, and you know, sort of an importance, at least linguistically. But there's also a cultural side to it, where people want to speak these languages. They're losing their identity. They're being overridden by other languages, which in some cases is natural, but in other cases is a little more predatory, I guess. And so there are people who want to keep their languages, but outside influences are sort of eliminating that. And you know, I want to work with people who want to save their language, or at least who are willing to share their language. But you're right, there are languages like Old English. We don't speak it anymore. We stopped speaking it a while ago. But it's because it's grown, it's evolved, it hadn't been eliminated in place of, you know, French or Portuguese or something. So we, you know, as English speakers, we are very lucky to have had our language around for a while, and it's still changing. And English 50 or 100 years from now will definitely be different than what we're speaking. And luckily, you and I will still be around to witness that.
Yeah, possibly. Now, a couple of times you mentioned, a couple of times you said you were documenting the language. Now, I'm actually really curious about the actual mechanisms you do to do that. So, as a language learner, for me, you know, if I want to learn French, so I watch French videos and French films, and I talk to people in French, and I take classes in French and all that sort of stuff. The same with Italian, you know. So obviously, you're not got that sort of resources available for some of these endangered languages. Now, you're saying you document them. Is that just like, okay, here's a grammar book and a dictionary, off you go? Or, you know, I know from Manx they did some videos of some of the older native speakers that they still had. But so how do you what is the documentation that you do, and how do you go about doing it, and what, you know, can you just describe that? I'm really quite intrigued.
Sure. Excuse me. Oh, bless you. It really depends on the language. It depends on what resources are available, if they have any written record of it. Otherwise, you know, I have an instructor who is documenting a language in Africa, and there's only one native speaker, and he's getting up there. He's old. You know, I think in his 60s or so, and he's the only person who speaks it. And he's tried sharing his language with, you know, his family and relatives, and, you know, and neighbors, and they think it's cute, but they don't have any desire to perpetuate it. So my instructor has to basically talk to one guy and say, okay, what's the word for this? What's the word for, how do you say this? How do you say that? And writes it down phonetically, and then looks for something that we like to call recurring partials, where you see, you know, segments of words show up over and over again, and you try and identify what those, you know, what those partials mean and how they change in the context of a sentence. And it's fascinating work. And I'm just in my first semester. Next semester, I have a number of classes for being out in the field that I'm really excited about. One in which we will be listening to a native speaker of some language, and we will be writing it down and documenting it and trying to create some grammar rules, I suppose, and a vocabulary. And it could be a popular language. It could be a widespread language that's well documented, like Bengali or Amharic, or, you know, anything. I think the more obscure, the better. But and it's always random per semester. So, but really, it's a lot of listening, a lot of writing down, and a lot of analyzing. And it's a bit unglamorous, I think, in some ways. But it's a lot of, you know, sound crunching and analyzing. But I like it, and I like the idea of taking this raw information, somehow creating a dictionary, putting it all in a book, or creating a grammar, and just kind of saying, here you go. Here is what we've you know, found your language to be. And it's my understanding is it's always an ongoing process. You're always adding to it. You're always changing things. And with Quiche, there are still things about the language that are being, researched and analyzed, and there are still a lot of mysteries about how certain words are used. So it's a lot of grunt work, it sounds like, but for me, it sounds like it's a fun thing, and just a wonderful challenge to try and dig my way out of.
Trouble. So one tip I would give you, you said you listen to it and you write it down. I'd suggest you record it.
Oh, and that is definitely something that they do. There is a lot of, I mean, if you go to these endangered language sites, you'll find archived recordings up the wazoo. David Harrison, who I mentioned, he does his group does a series of online talking dictionaries, and they have it for Quiche and oh God, I can't even remember. There are a bunch of them. If you look up online talking dictionary or living tongues, who he works with, you'll see that they have a lot of recordings. But yeah, you'll find that almost everywhere, and that is also key. So you are absolutely right.
So what do you do about, I don't know, sort of colloquialisms and slang and idioms and things like that? Presumably you're recording them verbatim, so you wouldn't necessarily, I was just trying to think, well, it's raining cats and dogs. If you record, how do you know when it's literal and when it's sort of an idiom?
That's a good question.
Other than that.
Yeah, that's good. I suppose that you would talk to the native speaker and ask, well, I don't see any cats or dogs. What does this mean? And he may, what's another way of saying that? And he may say, oh, it's raining a lot, or it's raining heavily. You might ask for a literal translation. I would imagine that you would have to go with that if you have a native speaker at your disposal. If you're just going by written records of a language that is has lost all of its native speakers, then you're probably a little hard pressed to find an easy translation. But I think that of course the more the better. If you only have, say, 10 pages of a language and that's all you've got, you really have a little to work with. So that's one of the challenges, I'm sure.
So when you do this, probably the end goal is to revitalize the language, right? Not necessarily, or is the end goal just to document it?
Ooh, that's a touchy subject. And one of my readings, I forget the author, I think Heine, Heine, I believe it was Heine, who said that you have to document first. You can't worry about revitalization. You have to document first, because that comes before everything. But I think, I beg to differ. I think that right now we have the ability to revitalize languages in many small ways, whether it's a website or an app, or training teachers or training people to be teachers of their own language, or training them to be linguists. Because really, we have so many languages that are just kind of disappearing more quickly than we can do anything with. And in some cases, if you have one or two speakers, you really don't have a reason to revitalize it. You have more of a reason to document it before the speakers pass away, but there's no community for them to share the language with. So a lot of people think, okay, documenting is the way to go no matter what, but I feel that there are ways to kind of do documenting and revitalization side by side if you have the community that wants to do it. But of course, it does take time to create resources, to study the language, and to find a way to train teachers in a language that a linguist may not necessarily know right away. So there are a lot of questions. It's a hot debate, but I think that revitalization is key, but again, only for the communities that want to do it and that have the size to perpetuate the language.
Okay, so I don't know. Once upon a time, somewhere in my history, I have some Native American, but I have probably zero interest in actually learning a language that I'm not actually going to be able to communicate to somebody, relatively easily. So how do you motivate somebody who's from that cultural heritage to actually pick up an interest in learning a language. Because trust me, learning a language isn't easy. It's bloody hard. So,
oh yeah, you've come to the right place.
how do you motivate somebody? So how do you motivate somebody, you know, to sort of pick up the baton and run with it, even though you've, you know, they're not a linguist or whatever? How do you get somebody to do that?
I don't know if you can. I mean, I really that is a problem. I mean, even I mean, even in America, in high schools and colleges, it's sometimes hard to get students to study a language. Something even as accessible as Spanish or French or German. So how do you get someone to study a language that they are tied to, but they have no emotional or spiritual connection with? It's really hard, and I think that you should never force someone to, but you can say, hey, look, we're working on your language. This is a language that you are connected with. This is the language of your ancestors, and we want to make it available to anyone who wants to learn it. And for documenting, a lot of times it's really kind of academic based, and so people want to go out, they want to get their PhDs, so they go out and try and document a language partially because it's their thesis. And so there's that sort of, I don't know, internal goal for a lot of students. But I don't know, I would really like to kind of get away from academia once I get my degree and go out and do it for communities that want that. And so, hopefully I will get to work with communities who really see the value in it. But there will always be stragglers who say, "Oh, I don't want to be part of that. I'm ashamed of my language," or I haven't spoken it in so long. I don't feel any connection, and kind of let them decide if maybe they do want to learn it down the line, especially when they see their relatives and their neighbors and their friends are taking an interest in it. Maybe that will be sort of the door that opens for them. But yeah, I don't think you can force it. I mean, especially with Native North Americans, there's been a lot of force to learn English, and so there's definitely a resentment there and sort of a resistance. And so forcing them to speak even a language that is really part of their history can still be seen as sort of an offense. So I would say let's make things available. Let's document the language. I want to learn the languages, but I can't learn all 7,000. I just don't have that kind of time. But I would love to learn how these languages work, and then create resources, create a website, maybe see if Duolingo or iTalki or any number of websites would have a feature that would teach even a little bit of these languages. Again, once more, going back to David Harrison and Living Tongues, they worked on Tuvan, which is spoken in Asia, and it's a small population, but they actually got Mango Languages to create a course on Tuvan. And I think you have to sign up through your library, but you can learn Tuvan through Mango Languages. And I think that's amazing.
So okay, so let's take it from the other perspective. So somebody who's not from that particular cultural heritage runs across, I don't know, let's pick a more major language. Let's pick Welsh. Let's pick on the Welsh for a bit.
Okay.
So say you're not Welsh. You've never been to Wales. You have no connection to Wales, whatever. But you live in, I don't know, France, and you saw that big long train station name, and you think, wow, that's a really cool language. I want to learn that. And so they learn Welsh. I mean, Welsh isn't, I don't know if it's considered endangered anymore, but if we did that for an endangered language, what's your feeling about a non-heritage speaker taking up, a language like Navajo, for example?
Oh, that's
it's what
Some communities are very protective of their language, and so they don't really take kindly to non-natives learning their language. I was involved in a Navajo project a while ago where they were dubbing Star Wars into Navajo, and I was fortunate enough to provide a voice, and people were very receptive. And Manny Wheeler, the guy in charge, the guy who came up with the idea and and essentially put it all together. He said, look, the Navajo language is for everyone. It's for this guy, me, for, anyone who wants to learn it. And the reason that they did this whole project was to, kind of share Navajo with the rest of the world. And so they were receptive of some, some non-Navajo just kind of coming in, and it can be a very, sensitive issue with a white man coming in and learning their language, but they were very receptive of it. So it really depends. It really depends on the group. Some people think, oh, hey, they want to learn our language. That's great. Other people are afraid that, I think the Cherokee are very protective because they don't want their language just, taken by anyone and going off and, making a profit by creating a book or appropriating it, and turning their language into, or their culture into, just some kind of, trendy white man thing. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I know there was some sort of some thing about Klingon and whether you could actually copyright a language or whatever. So I don't know. I doubt if you could copyright Cherokee, but I can see why they'd want to dissuade people from profiteering effectively off of their language. But then again, if you don't disseminate it, it dies. So
yeah, there's that risk. And so there's that conversation that I hear a lot where it's like, do you keep your language very insular and, and lose it when all of your elders pass away because the younger kids want to learn English or whatever the popular language is, whatever the language is that, where all the jobs are. And so in America, you can't go anywhere and get a job where you would speak Navajo or Lakota or Passamaquoddy. So it's not there. So people see their heritage languages as sort of restrictive. So yeah, no, yeah, it's a very sensitive issue, and that's one of the things I'm learning about. And it's fascinating, but you do have to tread lightly and be very sensitive. And there are some things like with Cherokee, there are stories that they don't want to just share with anyone. So you have to kind of be trusted because these are very personal stories. These are their histories, and it's their culture, and they're very sensitive to it. And other places are glad, or other communities are happy to share some vocabulary or all of their vocabulary. But it really depends. It varies from community to tribe to organization. And yeah. Talk to me in a year, and I'll have an update on that.
Okay, well, I'll remember. I'll write that down somewhere. I just wanted to say to people that if you've been doing languages, one of my experiences with iTalki, and I'm not getting any money from them. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but I have always begrudged spending money speaking to people on things like iTalki or Verbling or any of the others, and it was mainly because I really didn't see the value in it. Now, I used to do languages exchange with people, so this is where I meet a French speaker online. We spend a half hour speaking French and a half hour speaking English. So, I teach them a bit of English, they teach me a bit of French. And that never really worked out for me, mostly because I'm a pretty terrible person and I never showed up for the thing. So I was disorganized, and you really run out of things to talk about and all that sort of stuff. But I have noticed that as I've paid for the lessons, it overcomes my reticence to actually appear because I've paid somebody to do this. So it's my money, it's gone, and I want to get, my money's worth. So it makes me go to the actual class. I tend to not book tutors or teachers, but rather just conversationalists. And I think earlier, before we started the broadcast, Dave and I were talking about how to stay on track and how to carry on being motivated. And for me, it is actually quite a good motivation tool because speak to somebody at a set period of time. So I I learn more vocabulary. I cram, I practice before the class, I think about what I'm going to say, you know, and all that sort of stuff. So as a motivational tool, it is a bit of a, you know, the old carrot and stick. It's a bit of a stick, because I've spent the money, so I want to get my money's worth, and I have to talk to these people. And I've actually said to them, you can't speak to me in English. So that's what some of the rules I gave them were: you can't speak to me in English, you have to speak to me in French. If I can't think of the word, you have to wait. Like, don't just tell me the word. Wait until it chunders up through the bottom of my old brain. You know, and basically, if I can't find the word, I have to explain what word I mean in French to you to get the word. So it really is a bit of a brain ache at the end of the lesson. But if anybody's thinking about using iTalki or Verbling or any of the other, you know, sort of pay to speak ones, I'll definitely recommend it, because it does have some advantages over language exchanges, because you're not sharing, you're basically paying someone to teach you and to talk to you. So I find that quite useful. Anyway, that's just it came up recently, so I decided to talk about it today. There
Excellent.
you go.
I don't think I've heard of Verbling. What is it's similar to iTalki, or can you compare the two and kind of discuss the features of each?
Well, feature-wise, they're pretty much both the same. You get community tutors, so people who aren't professional teachers, i.e. they don't have a qualification in teaching French or English or whatever, but they're a native speaker, and they'll talk to you or teach you or give you some lessons if you want. And then they have the professionals, which are the people who have a teaching certificate and, you know, are verifiable teachers of a language. So they have the English teaching certification from Cambridge University or whatever. So, and those, they generally charge more, obviously, because they've got the qualifications. So Verbling, for example, has the same two types of people. Verbling generally tends to cost less, but there aren't as many people using it. So that's probably why. So I think iTalki is probably the market leader. If you're going to find a lot of speakers, that's the place to go. Verbling, if you're talking about a FIG, or what we call FIGs, French, Italian, German, so FIGs, Italian, German, Spanish, then you're pretty much guaranteed on either Verbling or iTalki to find somebody. But a more obscure language, not obscure, but not one of the big sort of 5 or 6 like Czech or Bengali or something, you'll still find tutors on iTalki, just because it's a much larger community of people. So that's would be my recommendation, to start there, especially if you're learning something that's not one of the big 5 or 6 languages. If you are learning one of the big 5 or 6, then check out Verbling, because it generally, their rates generally tend to be a bit cheaper, so a bit more cost effective.
Oh, excellent, excellent. You know, I just recently came across a site called tribolingual.com, I believe, and I wanted to mention that because I don't know anything about it other than some of the languages that they offer, but they are, I believe, it's a similar method. You communicate online. You pay one set fee, and they have Yoruba, they have Mongolian. I think they have Quechua, but I'm not sure. But I believe it's the same thing. But it's nice because it is fewer or less commonly learned languages. So if you're looking for something a little more obscure, if you're not in the FIGS group, then you may want to go there. And I've had to work on Yoruba for a project for this semester. And when I saw that they had that, I thought, oh, this is great. If I want to continue this, I can actually work with, I believe it's a live speaker, but it may also be videos too. So I may look into that and report on that next week. So.
No, that's a good idea. Well, you should record those videos, and then you can add them to your documentation.
Hey, exactly. I'll just use them for my research studies and get my degree. Woo!
Yeah. Get them to write your dissertation or whatever.
There you go. Actually, hey, best $150 I ever spent.
All right, cool. So for you, when you're sort of dabbling in languages, I suspect that your motivation you don't really have a motivation issue, because I know when you first start a language, it's all cool and it's all new and woo, you know, it's all wonderful. And then when you get sort of like 2 years in, it's like, oh crap, another grammar book.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, I think for me, there's this, there's a comfort level of being just a beginner speaker, because it's okay to make mistakes, and it's so much easier to go out there with 30 words and try and piece something together. And people are very forgiving, and they're like, wow, you speak Slovak perfectly. It's like, no, I only speak 30 words, but but because I'm speaking a language that most people don't go out and speak naturally or passionately. It seems to really impress other people, especially like Hungarian or Navajo or something. If you know 10 words in an uncommon language, I think it's got a fascination factor, and so it's great. So you can meet people, and it's a great conversation starter and a great icebreaker. But yeah, once you get to the point where you know enough of it, then people expect you to know even more of it, and so there's sort of that social aspect that keeps me from wanting to necessarily learn too much of a language. But I would like to get more proficient in as many languages as possible. But again, we know that I go wide and you go deep. So those are our things.
So how many languages, I know there's numbers bantied about, but you may actually know the answer. How many languages are sort of dying off, or how many languages do we have worldwide? Generally, I don't have Wikipedia handy. And how many of those are sort of endangered or dying?
Oh, it varies. It really varies. First of all, there are the big number thrown around that there are 7,000 languages in the world today, but there are areas that we haven't gone into. So there are places in the Amazon where there are groups of people that have not had contact with outsiders, as far as we know. So I'm sure there are many more languages that just have to be discovered. There are also questions or debates about what constitute a language versus a dialect. And so because of that, numbers will fluctuate based on who's doing the calculating and how they determine something to be a language. I don't know an exact number of endangered languages. Excuse me. It varies. Some languages are just near extinct. Some languages are dying. Some are at risk. And then some of these languages that were dying or were considered to be, too far gone are now coming back. I think Welsh was one of them. Manx, definitely. I mean, Manx, from what I've seen, has really made a comeback. And again, it's not necessarily safe, but they have done just amazing things with bringing Manx back, making it popular. I've met so many people who are just so proficient in it. They're not native speakers, as far as I know, but they've learned it and they're bringing it back. And again, no language is ever safe, because no matter how many times you bring it back, there's always the risk of it going away again. So it's really an ongoing process. But there are oh man, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of languages that are just so underrepresented or minoritized. So we have our work cut out for us linguists and documenters. But yeah, it's the number is not definite. So that's my long answer to your short question.
Yeah, typical. Well, we're going to have to wrap up in a minute. So what I wanted to do is I'm going to try and get as many links put in as possible for Manx and Welsh and Quiche and whatever else Dave can provide me with. I'll put in for the iTalki, the Verbling, and was it Tribal
Lingual, and I'll find the link for you and send that your way right after this.
Right. Yeah. So we'll definitely put all the links in the show notes down below. So make sure you click subscribe, and we'll see you again next week. So bye from me.
All right, and bye from me.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Take care.